Ask Reddit, what's the creepiest paranormal activity you ever encountered? Story number 1. My dad worked in security. I got into it after he passed. One night I was called on my night off. They need someone to go fill in on another site. I never worked the site before, but hey, overtime, I accepted. It was one of my dad's old sites. So it is about 0200 I am doing a round. I enter one of the buildings and I think I see someone moving up ahead. It is 0200 and the building is locked. There should not be anyone in there. I quietly close the door behind me and creep up for a closer look. At the end of the hall is a security guard, which is odd as I am the only guard on duty at the time. So I am eyeing this guy, and I notice the uniform. It is for a company that doesn't exist anymore. In fact, it is for the company my dad worked for when he was at this site. So it hits me that it is my dad. I'm standing there watching him. He is apparently doing a round of the building I am patrolling. So I watch him. He looks directly at me as if he could see me. He looks at me for about 30 seconds or so. He then turns the corner. I run to catch up with him, but he was gone. Almost 2 years later, I still swear I actually saw him that night. I don't know if it was a ghost, if I was hallucinating because it was one of his old posts and I was emotional, or if maybe somehow time loops exist and I actually saw him working the site in the past. I honestly don't know, but every time I have a night off and they can't find anyone to fill in, I jump at it. No longer for the overtime, but with the hope that whatever happened that first time happens again. I have filled in there over 20 times since that encounter and I haven't seen anything since. Story number 2. A couple of friends and one hot roommate rented a house in the next city over. One floor, had a partially finished basement. The owner started the job but never completed it. Only the outer walls and one interior room were put in. The main area was open with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Scattering of old furniture around. My friends used to use the basement to host parties. Apparently there was a standing request not to sleep down there, a request that I did not hear. We were maybe 20 or 21 at the time. Well, after one party, people started going to sleep wherever they could find space, and I picked the only open spot I could find, this old couch in that basement. I wake up after just a few hours, must have been 4 or 5 a.m., and I hear a guy and girl whispering and giggling in that partially built next room. It sounded like someone who was at the party, so I got up to ask them to be quiet, and as soon as I got near that doorway, it stopped. Weird. But I thought maybe I was hearing people still partying upstairs and it just sounded like whispering through the floor, no biggie. It didn't start back up, so I decided to ignore it and try to go back to sleep. I laid back down. That bright light was shining in my face, and I wasn't sure how to turn it off, so I closed my eyes and just tried to fall asleep anyways. While I'm laying on the couch with my eyes closed, I saw a shadow move across my eyelids, as if something moved between me and that light. So at this point I sit bolt upright and said nope, 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 over and over again, as I started walking towards the stairs. The cement floor was a bit uneven, so I'd hear a scuffing noise with some of my footsteps, but I'd hear it even when my shoe didn't scrape the floor. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and listened, and those shuffling footsteps kept going. So I sprinted up the stairs and paused one more time at the top and looked back and saw nothing. I don't know. I expected to see someone. I waited maybe 10 seconds, listening out, and finally I hear what sounds like a single footfall on wood and creak of that bottom stair. I shut the door behind me and backed away watching it, but nothing ever came through. I'm frantically trying to find one of my friends who rented the place without waking anyone up, and I find the roommate on an air mattress in the living room, which is weird, but whatever. I start shaking her and I go, "CC, wake up, your basement is haunted." She just looks at me like I'm an idiot and says, "Duh. We told everyone not to sleep down there." And I just went, "Oh, so can I crash on the corner of the air mattress?" And she said I could. So the next day, I get all of the ghost stories from them about this house. Apparently the main floor was haunted too, and the basement was just the worst spot for it. Story number 3. Bit of background. When my wife was young, her parents and siblings lived with one set of her grandparents. Her grandfather was murdered in the home. It happened in his bedroom upstairs. The room was used primarily as storage for the next 20+ years. Her parents tried to sell the house multiple times, but living in a small town, everyone knew and the house would not sell, so they stayed. Years later, and while my wife and I were engaged, there was a murder trial which I attended in support of her family. I saw the crime scene photos, important later. Another few years later, we had 2 kids, the oldest was 6 at the time. My wife's family does not talk about the murder, and our kids do not know about the murder to this day. My Phil decided he wanted the room where the murder happened to be a hangout for the grandkids when the family was in town. He put sleeping bags and a TV in the room ahead of a holiday, days-long get-together. We didn't like it but stayed silent since the murder was a sore subject. My Phil also wanted all the grandkids to all sleep in there together. We were the first to arrive and my son went into the room alone. He usually couldn't sit still long at that age, so after a couple of hours I decided to check in on him. Here is our conversation. During the whole conversation, he was still and rigid and would not look away from the TV. "Hey buddy, is everything okay up here?" "Yeah." "Okay, have fun." "Daddy, do I have to sleep in here?" "I don't want to." "Why not?" "I am not alone." Every hair on my body stood up. "Well, yeah, I'm here with you, buddy." "No, there is someone in here with us." "Are they nice? Mean? A grown-up? A kid? A grown-up? What are they doing right now?" "They are watching you. You have never said anything like this at your grandparents' house before, and you have been here a lot. They don't leave this room and I have never been in here before." "Where are they now?" Without looking away from the TV, he points to the far corner where his great-grandfather was murdered and said, "They are standing over there. They don't move much." "Okay, buddy, you don't have to stay in here," and he left the room with me. Story number 4. In high school, I was babysitting for a single mom and her 2 kids. It was the middle of winter, and when I arrived, it was already pitch black out, around like 6 p.m. She lived in a duplex. While I was standing in the living room with her and her girls talking about how the rest of the night would go, a little boy in full snow gear came in through her front door, stomped through the living room past us, and headed down the stairs to the basement. The mom never even looked at him or stopped talking. The girls didn't make any acknowledgement that they saw him. I was super weirded out, but I was also an extremely introverted teenager, so I didn't ask the mom what was up. Once the mom left, I asked the girls who the little boy was that came in, and they both had no idea what I was talking about. So I got brave and grabbed a broom and headed downstairs. It was a small, unfinished basement, one single room with no closets or anything. No one was down there, and the little boy definitely had not come back upstairs in that time. So weird, and the only time I have truly believed I experienced something paranormal. I normally scoff at ghost stories and stuff. Story number 5. I've had a few experiences throughout my life, but here's one I've never shared on here before. I was at my grandparents' getting changed in the bathroom to go swimming in their pool. The bathroom had a small octagon-shaped window. The window was high up and overlooked the porch. I was sitting on the toilet below it when I looked up and saw a man who looked like he was screaming through the window. His skin looked like it was burnt and smoldering. His hair was patchy and dark and his expression never changed. It was like he was frozen in time. For some reason I didn't mention it to anyone and just quickly bolted out of the bathroom and went to the one upstairs without a window, and did so until my grandparents moved out of that house. The house wasn't old or creepy. Story number 6. When I was a teenager, my bedroom was in the basement. You could hear clearly anytime someone came down the stairs and my bed was creaky. Like lay down, sit, or move, and the springs would let anyone nearby know creaky. I was just starting to fall asleep one night and heard footsteps. I thought, no big deal. It's probably my mom coming to do laundry. Fell back asleep. I felt pressure on the bed behind me. I slept with my back to the stairs and it creaked. Everything in me was screaming, don't move, just lay here and don't move. I eventually fell asleep out of exhaustion. This happened multiple times, and one night I had enough of being terrified, and when I heard the creak I hadn't moved to do it, and felt the pressure next to me, I rolled over and sat up. Nothing. There was nobody physically there. I've experienced things before that and since, but that was the one that freaked me out the most. Story number 7. I was walking home one night from my grandmother's house. We lived in a village in rural Ireland. Granny's house was on the outskirts of the village, so I had to walk up a narrow country lane to get to Granny's house and back down the lane to get toward the village. My granddad was dying and the priest have him the last rites. He pulled through the night and my granny told me to go home and get a bit of a rest. I reluctantly agreed and walked home. Down the country lane I've been walking on since I was a boy, only this time it seemed weird in some way, almost eerie, and I never get spooked. I pushed the feeling to the side as my mind was in shock about Granddad. I was walking toward the bottom of the lane when I noticed a blur of white down the bottom of the lane beside one of the farmer's gates to the field beside my grandparents' house. I thought it was a lamb escaped. It happens a lot. I walked toward it to investigate. When I walked toward the blur of white, it felt like electricity entered every inch of my body. The hairs were standing up on my arms and what was left on the top of my head. I stood frozen in perpetual fear as the figure was an old hunched woman in a white robe, and she just screamed the most merciful scream. The guttural scream was so frightening I actually stopped breathing with sheer fear. I looked up into her face and saw nothing, just a blur. The cry was ungodly, like a mother finding out their child is dead. The most scariest scream I've ever witnessed. Adrenaline must have kicked in because I legged it straight back up the lane toward Granny's house and legged it in the front door. I could hear my granny rushing out Granddad's room crying. She said, "Granda's gone." Imagine he just passed away within the 5 minutes of me leaving and encountering the woman on the lane. I remember telling my elderly aunt and a few family members about the woman, and they said that she was a friend of the family by now. She only appears when someone is going to die. I thought they were taking the piss until my father, a born skeptic and very religious man, confirmed the woman's existence. In some families in Ireland, she would be called the Banshee. I'll never forget her. Not even when I'm on my own deathbed will I ever forget the howl. Thank you. Story number 8. When I was a kid, we lived pretty far out of town, heading up into the mountains, right next to old railroad tracks. The area was big for logging and at one time gold mining. I remember waking up in the middle of the night. The moon was bright and made it easy to see. For some reason I peeked out the blinds, and about 20 yards away, standing on the road, was a man. He was wearing an old miner's hat and was just standing completely still, staring at our house. I have no idea if he could see me, but I was frozen. After about 10 minutes I eased away from the window and laid in bed, trying not to think about it. About an hour later, still not able to sleep, I checked the window again, and he was still there. It freaked me out, so I refused to look out the window again that night. I kind of forgot about this incident until several years later, the exact same thing happened again. Another bright moon. I once again woke up in the middle of the night and felt compelled to look out the window. Same man, same hat, standing in the same spot, just staring. I never talked to anyone about it, and I'm not sure if it was something paranormal or just a man with a creepy habit. Story number 9. When I was around 7, I had been feeling sick one day and fell asleep on the sofa in my dad's office, which has 2 doors and is between the kitchen and a hallway. I must have fallen asleep in the early evening and slept like a rock until I woke up in the middle of the night with our 2 cats locked in the office with me, and they were meowing frantically. I was sick, a little kid, and I didn't know what to do, so I just sat there and cried. After a couple minutes, my older brother must have heard me, which was weird because he used to listen to wear his Walkman headphones at night, because he opened the door from the kitchen side and reached out for me as if to say, "All right, come here." He had his Walkman and headphones in the other hand. I took his hand and he walked me downstairs to his bed, and he let me sleep with him that night. Years later, when I was a teenager, I was retelling that story at some family event, and my brother cut me off to say that he didn't come upstairs. I walked down to his room. I had woken up disoriented and scared. There was no way I left that room by myself. I was also skittish of my dad's basement at that age, hence needing the escort. I vividly remember just sitting there crying when he opened the door, while he has equally specific memories of me showing up next to his bed. So to this day, who or what took my hand and walked me downstairs is anyone's guess. Final story. I'll take some time to type this. It's a little long but still scares me every time I think about it, and I still can't comprehend it. When I lived in Oregon, I worked IT for the community college. I wasn't getting out until 9-10 p.m. by myself. It was a normal day like any other. By the time I left work, it was pitch black and the thick underbrush made it even harder to see. This will be important later. I drove through town and finally got to the highway that led from Lincoln City to Corvallis, which was a long stretch of empty highway that ran 1+ hours through the forest. After about 45 minutes, I got to the hill that split into 2 lanes on both sides. As I accelerated in my tiny lawnmower of a car, I noticed something moving alongside the guardrail. Okay, I thought, it's a deer. No big deal, just slow down and avoid the cute little bugger. I was extra careful because that thick underbrush meant each side of the road would be a deep well of blackness that could have any little critters hiding there, waiting to jump into your windshield. Well, before I could finish that thought, I saw feet. If you're from Oregon, you know the homeless situation is abysmal. It wouldn't be too strange for one of them to be hitchhiking out here, but it was definitely out of sorts this late at night. Well, I decelerated to about 65. I was going and kept an eye on those white shoes walking up the road. By the time I actually realized those were legs, shoes walking, the man darted out in front of my Nissan, in what I thought was a suicide attempt. I slammed on the brakes trying to avoid him. I'm getting goosebumps just typing this, and ended up sliding sideways going 60 miles per hour in the opposite lane while the man ran out in front of me relentlessly. All I could see was his red plaid shirt and his body as he hit the hood of my car. When I came to a stop, he was leaning on the hood, staring directly at me. The primal fear I felt was something I didn't even know existed. The high beams of my car didn't even pierce whatever this man was. It was the blackest shadow, a void. Then in an instant he vanished, gone. I was breathless, absolutely breathless, shaking, thought I'd killed someone. I sat in the opposite lane sideways, breathing heavily for a minute or two. I couldn't help but scream at that point and pound on my accelerator to get out of there. I called my husband, screaming and crying that I just killed a man but that he disappeared and I didn't know what was happening. I left the scene, I know, illegal. By the time I got home, 30 minutes later, Terry was still shaking. I got out of my car and ran to the hood, seeing no dents, no handprints, nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Here's where it got more messed up. The next day at work, I researched deaths on that highway and found that a man rolled his truck with his wife and child inside. All three died. I highlighted his name and inputted into Facebook. The first profile that came up was a memorial for that man. In his profile photo, he wore a red plaid shirt. I returned a few weeks later. In that same area where my skid marks were was the guardrail. Tied to that guardrail was, and probably still is, a moldy child's toy, a rabbit. Something is deeply, deeply haunted about that highway. I'm just glad there wasn't anyone in the oncoming lane, or I too would be trapped there along with that man, whoever he was.